Good morning. I'm Malcolm Clemens Young, Dean of Grace Cathedral. Welcome to the Forum winter season. How do we live with fire? Fire is an essential part of California's ecology. Humans have been using it to shape the California landscape for thousands of years. But today, many Californians' relationship to fire is one of fear. Obi Kaufmann, author of the best-selling California Field Atlas, asks us in his latest book, The State of Fire, Why California Burns, how do we live with fire? What makes fire essential to a healthy and biodiverse Golden State, and how do we benefit from its teachings? With the same solution-minded ethic as his much-admired The State of Water, Understanding California's Most Precious Resource, Kaufmann presents fire as a force of regeneration rather than an apocalypse. He considers the long history of ecological burns, the varied ways fire behaves across the state, and the lessons we can learn from California's largest fires of recent decades. Packed with his signature watercolor maps and paintings, The State of Fire confronts one of California's most pressing social and ecological challenges. From this maelstrom, Kaufmann emerges to share a deepened love for the natural world and a refreshingly hopeful vision of California's future. Today, we're going to be talking about stewardship, resilience, and hope. Obi, thanks so much for joining us today. I know tipped the train all the way on one of the rainiest days of the year, and then you hiked up the hill. We're really glad to see you.
It's an easy walk.
Okay, good.
I'm so happy to be here.
Oh,
Thank you so much. What an honor and a privilege.
And what a gift it is for me. I've been such a fan of your work for so long, and I've been really looking forward to our time together.
Thank you so much. Right on.
You know, with the fires in Los Angeles County that are so devastating, I just as it all was unfolding, I just kept thinking about you and wondering just how your education about fires and the natural landscape made you experience that fire in maybe a different way than folks who just read about it in the newspapers.
Yeah. You know, I've been studying California ecology my whole life, I suppose. My father was an astrophysicist. He was the director of the Griffith Observatory down in Los Angeles.
Right.
I was born in LA.
Yeah.
He moved us up to the East Bay in the late 70s, really, and Mount Diablo, my home mountain, my mountain home, where as a young naturalist I cut my teeth drawing sage mazes and climbing waterfalls and playing with tarantulas and all that kind of stuff. And fire was always there.
Yeah.
There's always the acute sense in California. Why is this serotinous pine tree cone closed?
Right, exactly.
It won't open for temperatures less than 500 degrees, right? It won't actually propagate its seed unless it's exposed to these extreme environments.
Yeah.
And that coevolution throughout California's deep history has always been fascinating to me. Now, I mentioned my father was an astrophysicist, so Dr. Kaufmann's son was going to be a mathematician, and you know.
Me too.
Right?
My father was a mathematician. I was going to be a mathematician too. And,
Interesting.
And Mount Diablo, central importance. It's the one thing that I can see from all the places I've pretty much lived in my adult life.
Oh, wow.
You know, same kind of thing.
Right.
And you're right. The dad who's an engineer and a scientist, a mathematician, definitely had.
Well, that'd be
impact
really
on
interesting to trace sort of the parallels of our own sort of respective vocations, because, you know, I really came to this hard stop with my study of math in terms of the aesthetic experience.
Right.
Really with what it is to be an artist. I'm not talking about like the notion of beauty necessarily in terms of the sunset or something like that, but really in terms of conscious reconfiguration or imagination or conceiving of creative environments to share with my community, and that feeling of arrest inside of me, and that feeling of like, this is beautiful. This is like the grace, for lack of a better word, of like the well-rendered wildlife illustration. You know, I mean, this is why I get so nerdy about like even like counting all of the feathers on the eagle wing, right? Because that, like, I have to get it right. It's like mixing the data with this very human thing, and that leads me to all this like conciliant thought between the physical sciences and the humanities. And that leads me to question the why of things and the why of California. And it turns out that fire is the answer for a lot of that why. Why are California's ecosystems configured the way they are? Well, it turns out that it's not just fire, but the human application of fire onto the land.
Did you ever read William Cronin's Changes in the Land? It's a 1983 book about the Northeast. That was the first time where I thought, wow, I mean, these were all managed landscapes.
Yes.
And it never occurred to me before then. And I was just surprised I didn't hear that more often.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Like, you pick up a book on the history of California, and chapter 1 is like everything before 1850.
Right,
You know?
completely.
And then the rest of the book is about what happened in American California.
Yeah. Well,
right?
it's funny that you even raise that, because one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, like, so if you could know something about, pre-contact California life, what would you want to know? What questions would you have for the people who were here before the Europeans arrived?
Well, the beautiful moment of now is that the beauty of this current moment is that you can actually ask them.
Yeah.
They're still here.
Right.
It's very important not to speak of native Californians in the past tense.
Yeah.
Right. So I am published by Heyday Books. This little outfit out of Berkeley. Malcolm Margolin. Yes. You guys share the same first names. He wrote The Ohlone Way. Yeah. And Heyday has been publishing, among other things, the news from native California, and they have quite a stable of native indigenous authors.
Yeah.
Including my podcast co-host, Greg Saris, who's the chairman of the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria up in Santa Rosa.
Yeah.
We have a podcast together called Place and Purpose, where we are stewarding these Southern Pomo and Coastal Miwok stories into sort of a framework of modern ecological relevancy.
Yeah.
And he is not only the chairman of his tribe, but also professor of literature at Stanford, for example. And we go deep with this stuff, and we consider not only sort of this mythopoetic landscape, which is really the idea that California is itself an artificial creation, or an artifact, if you will, of human stewardship over tens of thousands of years, potentially.
Yeah, like 2 tens of thousands.
2 tens of thousands. And what you start to find when you research paleoclimatology, for example, of how the California floristic province developed over that time frame, you get things. You come across certain historical dates, like about 6,000 years ago, when San Francisco Bay became its configuration.
Exactly, it wasn't just a valley.
600 family tribes really around the bay, and that was really like the formation of indigenous communities across California. Nearly all of them use fire in a very specific way, in a very sophisticated methodology towards the greater fecundity of land production, food stores. We're talking about dozens and dozens of species of acorns, nuts, seeds, fruits, bulbs. It's a supermarket. When you let fire do the thing that it was co-evolved in California to do.
Right.
And what that is it shocks the ground with nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium, all of these great chemical fertilizers. And we're not talking about big mega fire.
Right, exactly.
We're talking about a completely different character of fire, right? It's one of those counterintuitive truths that
not all fires are the same.
Scientists, that's right. Or fire scientists really begin to uncover these counterintuitive truths, like, for example, with more fire comes less fire.
Yeah.
Right, because you don't have the buildup of ladder fuels, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I that's one of the things I just loved about your book. It was just the history of fire and our evolving understanding of it. And I just feel like the last 20 years have been such a revolutionary time. But maybe you could just kind of take us through that history of fire suppression and approaches to fire up to our current time.
Yeah, what I think you're alluding to there is that there are 2 stories at work in the book here. There's the very, very new story of fire and the very, very old story of fire.
Yeah.
The new story of fire is really just over the past few decades, really, when universities across the West have divorced fire ecology studies from forestry studies, which is silviculture, which is the commodification of the forest in terms of timber.
Yeah.
And yet now the study of how fire informs biodiversity to such a degree that the great fire historian Stephen Pine, who's still at the University of Northern Arizona, said, in California, biodiversity equals pyrodiversity, and vice versa. Pyrodiversity being the mixed severity, mosaic burn patterns across these different ecosystems, across these different habitat types. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's the very, very new story that's emerging. And the very, very old story is like in this thing that is often lumped together as traditional ecological knowledge.
Right.
The other tech, if you will, TEK.
Yeah.
Traditional ecological knowledge, which is the idea that in pre-contact fire regimes across the state, it's something like 6 to 10 million acres a year were put to the torch.
Yeah.
And as I say, much different character. We're talking about fires that averaged about 500 acres.
Yeah, and done regularly, so not having like a century's worth of fuel that they're consuming.
And this gets up like right now to today. If you look at a picture of the Palisades from the 1920s before the developers came, there's not a tree there.
Yeah.
This was a burn plain of the Chumash for thousands of years. Every year that plain got torched.
Yeah.
And
it's funny that you would say the 1920s. I think the best time to live in California may have been the 1920s in Santa Monica. It's so beautiful.
I mean, it's still tragically beautiful, heartbreakingly beautiful. I have dozens of friends who lost everything, and the human terror, the human trauma is so irreconcilable with what is going on. The frustration often manifesting itself as political gibberish.
Maneuverings and gibberish.
Exactly. But that because ultimately fire is not like a tornado or a hurricane.
Yeah.
There is this element of management and stewardship that plays into it.
Exactly. So you hear the same stories every time, like revisiting the PG&E lines and wondering if it was human caused, the original spark, arson. I mean, so it's always connected to the human world. And
always connected to such a degree that you can say definitively that fire, California burns because of decisions that humans make.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Even lightning storms. Like you remember like that great lightning storm that came over in August of 2020.
I remember going to Ocean Beach to go surfing, and there's lightning like all the way down to like.
I was on 580. I saw the same thing. It was just like, what is happening?
Well, I mean, basically, it's the only time in my life in California where I didn't go in the water because of lightning here.
Yeah.
And of course, the lightning storms in Big Basin just ignited the whole thing.
Well, you could probably take us through the etymology of the word apocalypse better than I can.
Yeah.
Because doesn't it mean like something like revelation?
Yeah, revelation. So I mean, apo is like a preposition meaning from or to, depending on the case of the rest of the word, and kaleo is to call. So it's like a revealing, like an unveiling of what's really there.
So even like to call fire and like these apocalyptic fires, it's like. Well, then there is sort of a call to action there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like this call to like restructure this story that even might transcend the argument. You know, that's really what I try and do with these books, is that it's not so much about making an argument about why I am right or X, Y, or Z or whatever we're going after. It's really about like, remember I was talking about the history books in chapter 1, everything before 1850. It's like,
exactly.
How about that? My next book I'm writing actually right now, it's going to be another big book like one of these books. It's going to be called The Origins of California.
Oh, I cannot wait for this.
Oh, thank you.
Because like I said, that's what it's trying to get at that question.
We're going back to the Mesozoic. We're going back. Back. To why and
ground
how.
sloths in Sacramento.
Here. Absolutely.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah, at the last glacial maximum about 18,000 years ago, when there was so much seawater locked into ice in the on-land glaciers, you could walk from here to the Farallon Islands across the Farallon Steppe.
Yeah.
Now, what you would have been doing there is sharing that space with about 25 herbivores
Yeah.
that weigh more than 200 pounds, including 3 species of mammoth and ground sloths, as you mentioned, the largest camel in the fossil record,
Yeah.
9 feet at the shoulder, this kind of thing. And you can imagine all of those species across the paleo-floristic province that would become California, or Holocene California. You have incredible grazing pressure, right? So an interesting translation occurred, ecological translation occurred between the grazing pressure that all of those animals, that incredible portfolio represented, and then coming anthropogenic fire.
Yeah.
And the nature of regeneration, and the nature of how closed forests, shaded forests, are actually deleterious to the fecundity and overall productivity of those ecosystems. A fact that we're dealing with right now across Northern California that has a fire drought over the past 100 years, given, as you were mentioning, fire exclusion policies, and where Southern California has the fire glut. Right. Too much. That chaparral doesn't want to burn that much.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you mentioned is just, I've got the quote in here. It's you're talking about zombie forests. This is on page 174. You're right. Almost 20% of the forests in the Sierra are unable to access adequate nutrient conditions to support their continuance. And I wrote 2 lines in the margin. I mean, it's just such an extraordinary statement to make, just how much the world is changing around us at such a quick rate. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. You call it anthropogenic climate change. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I call it instead of calling it climate change, I call it climate breakdown by anthropogenic global warming.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Right. So, because I think that's a little
It's
bit
not
more...
quite as catchy, though.
Right.
It's not working yet on me.
It's kind of a mouthful.
Still going to be working on it, though.
But, let's relax into the poetry.
Right, completely.
Because, and I think that the story I would want to tell to answer your question must necessarily get to be a little poetic. But that's okay. I'm an artist. I need that license and that shield to wade into these waters, because I believe that there's a cognitive through line from poetry to science and ultimately to policy. Like this is when we start to feel, when you feel that something is wrong in our forests, when our forests across the southern Sierra Nevada and many parts across the northwestern California and even into northeastern California, we've got these forests that are overpopulated, they're drought stressed, they are plague riddled,
the beetles.
they're fungal infested, they're insect infested and plague riddled. This fungal blight, the only prescription is fire. And then you have the soil. Like, that feeling in the old growth forest where you pick up a handful of that black, beautiful humus, and you just realize how many billions of microorganisms are inside of that handful, and you can smell it. And what you're doing right there is you're smelling hundreds of thousands of fungal spores, and your body reacts to this with like biophiliac response, and you get the sense that you're in an intelligent space, right? You're like, this habitat space is like works together. Like this is a grand tapestry of vector agents that are working to create this homeostatic pattern across space and time. And there's a real intelligence at work there. And you go to the overcrowded forest, the diseased forest, as I'm talking about in the southern Sierra Nevada, where an old growth ponderosa forest might have like 40 stems per acre or whatever. In these new forests, it's upwards of over 1,000 stems, where 6 to 10 inches diameter breast height, DBH, how foresters measure trees. And they're all together. And you imagine every one of those stems is a straw into the aquifer, right? And so the soil is just dead. You don't get that feeling at all. And then you get this sense of like, these forests are young and in fact dumb. There's no intelligence there, right? That subtle intelligence that I'm talking about. And then you think of like this covenant that has been broken over the past 170 years. It's almost as if the trees are asking us, where did you go? Where did you go? We had this deal.
Right, in a relationship.
You give us fire. to clean ourselves, to empty out the forest. All boats rise in a well-maintained fire succession ecology.
Yeah.
All boats. You think deer don't have anywhere to go in that forest, right?
Yeah, exactly. It can't even pass through.
Exactly. And we give you all the food stuff, right? So now we're trending towards simplification and brittleness in our ecosystems because of decisions that humans make.
Yeah. You know what I really love about that picture? I guess part of it is, for me, it's artistic, poetic. It's important though, because I really want to be in the place that I live. I want this place. I want to know what a California buckeye tree is, or a bay laurel tree is, and all the creatures in the forest. I want to be able to recognize them and understand the bird songs. And this helps us do that. But I think part of what you're doing too is you're giving us a vision of things. So on the one hand, we have this massive change in our climate, which is going to have devastating effects. But on the other hand, we haven't been doing a great job of taking care of these open and natural areas anyway. So there's an opportunity that's arising that's related to this terrible crisis that we're facing.
Oh, you just framed that so well. That's so good. This idea of that really just haunts me all the time. This like how do I be more from this place?
Yeah.
My mom was born in LA, and her mom was born there too, and yet I still feel like I'm colonizing this place.
Yeah.
I still feel like my own mind is colonized. How I know it's not some kind of destination I'm going to get to. Finally I'm from here or something. There's no revelation in that sense, no apocalypse in that sense. But there is this process. This process that comes about through, I think, the practice of poetry. And what I mean by poetry isn't necessarily like verse.
Well, I know. I've even got a line from one of your poems that I want to ask you about here too. So I'm going to do that.
Good.
But I mean, you're as a teacher, you are helping other people to inhabit the place they live in.
Isn't that so ironic though? Because I just do not have a didactic bone in my body. I'm not like this whole stuff. Like the criteria for the data presentation, the criteria for a complete presentation is totally self-regulated and autodidactic. And it's just, if I'm satisfied,
right,
then I'm inviting you to come along with me. Like my father wrote textbooks.
Yeah.
I really eschew the idea of being a textbook writer, and I don't want these to be textbooks.
Yeah.
I want them to be. When I started this book, it's like I didn't know what it was going to be. I just knew that every page had to drip with color and soul.
And it does. It has so much soul. It's just such a successful project. And like I said, I mean, it's like the perfect thing. Like the time is right for it. In the midst of this horrible tragedy, you're right. I've got friends who lost everything. I mean, neighborhoods that I lived in are gone. I mean, it's heartbreaking to see. And even in Northern California, I just think of, everything that happened in Sonoma County and Lake County just destroyed, and no one even thinks about it anymore. Paradise, all of it.
Human buildings don't grow back of their own accord, but plants have a pretty good,
that's good. So they
have a plan.
Yeah.
They have every arboreal habitat, every grassland habitat in California is either adapted to or dependent upon fire. Even the most intense burn zones, 100% mortality, when it looks as if
there's nothing to ever live there again.
Has been burned to glass. Yeah, that's right. And yet that, to our eye is misleading what is actually happening. That is fallow ground. That is seedlings waiting to come up. The book starts with my
I know
residency.
exactly. I love that. I love that picture of being up in the residency by the valley there. And
that's right.
Yeah.
It was 5 years after the Carr fire.
Right.
And the Carr fire was one of these devastating mega fires. And you guys probably saw in the footage from a few weeks ago the little fire tornado that spawned in the Palisades. The fire tornado in Carr fire was 10 orders of magnitude larger than that fire tornado. It was 3/4 of a mile wide. It was 3.5 miles tall. It punctured a hole right into the stratosphere. It was the devastating force of several dozen Hiroshima bombs.
Yeah.
And it burned at 3,000 degrees. And when it moved through that neighborhood, your house doesn't burn at that point.
Yeah.
Your house vaporizes in the flashover effect in less than 3 minutes. Your porcelain tub is gone, your stove is gone, there's nothing left. And yet, here I am 5 years later, just 5 years later, I'm standing in this super bloom of flowers in this early sterile snag forest, and there are birds everywhere. It's a complete city of songbirds, right?
Yeah.
And there's potentially more biodiversity in that early sterile snag forest than there is in like old growth forests, right? And then I'm standing there and I'm walking around with National Park Service botanists, and they discovered 3 species of flower, completely unknown to science.
Yeah.
You know, we know what the genus is, we don't know what the species are, they're still unnamed, but they're there in the seed bank for over 100 years, just waiting for
their moment.
The apocalypse.
The apocalypse. Yeah. So you have handwritten like poetic poems in here. And here's one of my favorite, page 145. And here, I'm just going to give this to you just because you're never going to remember what's on 145.
Thank you.
But you need glasses. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's all good.
So here's what you write. You write. You don't even need it to look at it if you don't want to. But here's what you write. And it's above a painting of a fox. And you write this. You describe this book as the careful telling of what a relationship to fire means in terms of our societal relationship with one another.
Yeah. I think the key word there is meaning, means, right? Like as opposed to truth. Like I trust my scientists with the delivery to the best of their ability, like that data set, right? But the quantification and qualification of what it is to mean a thing, that's our job, as the poets of the world. And the poets, Shelley called them the unacknowledged legislators of the world.
Yeah, right.
Poets, and I'm not talking about verse poetry, I'm talking about like the ability, as I said earlier, to envision a creative space somehow and to share that vision with one's community. It could be the poetry of cooking, the poetry of teaching, the poetry of preaching, that kind of
exactly.
thing. Like that's all the poetry of painting.
Yeah.
I need to describe to you at length, clearly, what I'm doing with these paintings, right? I don't want them to just like be there necessarily. I want to be able to introduce you to them and describe what I'm doing, to operate inside this like deep and sophisticated lexicon of cultural shared symbols that is like right now.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things I think I'd love to hear what other readers love about your books besides me. But in this world where technology is changing how we communicate so much with one another, this is a little bit of an antidote to that for me, of having everything kind of on the social media feeds, all that kind of stuff. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just like the changes of technology, and then maybe you can talk about what it is that you think you're doing in relation to those.
It's so true. Like I graduated UC Santa Barbara in '95, and we were the first class to have the email address. There's this thing coming. It's called the internet. It's going to democratize all knowledge.
I had an email address in the 80s, but it was because I was doing all this computer programming.
Oh, I see.
But you're right. They didn't give email addresses to anybody who wasn't working on the mainframe until 1995.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's when every student got one, right?
Yeah.
And nobody knew how to use it, and it didn't ever get used.
Well, I had this friend. He's a total engineering nerd, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm sending these notes to this lady at the University of Washington." I'm like, "That's insane! This thing that's made for like nuclear Armageddon, and he's using it to like that has no future."
Yeah.
Like that, all the internet is used for now. Is that
right? I think I was a little more positivist about it. I thought that I really bought it. I was like, okay, democratize all knowledge. That's fantastic. And then you fast forward 10, 15 years later, and social media begins to crush. Algorithms begin to rule over because there's very little meaning on the internet. You might find some truth if you dig hard enough. And I give a lot of real estate space inside of my books towards citations because you got to get the data right. It's all got to be, so really, if I'm going to present data at all, it's got to be. Yeah, you can't be seen to just be making this stuff up. You have to be grounded in the science. That's exactly correct. Exactly correct. And because I really don't want to waste your time. Yeah. But reverse engineering, really, from the internet back to this form.
Yeah.
I am a bibliophile.
Oh, me too.
I love them.
Love books. Same with me.
Yeah,
Well, that's why I love these books.
Thank you. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And then I wanted to play with the format itself, like the internet maybe, or like some sort of like new model. There is no beginning or end to this. They're almost like circular in their narrative, if you will. The promise is that you could learn something
And you can
page.
literally begin the book and then begin it again after finishing the last page, and there's more to take in.
That's right. You can surf it as much as you can read it.
It's both your analytical part of you, the artistic, the visual, the written and the logical. It's all of those things. But
it's all of those things. But I think like what we're skirting around is the idea of informational conveyance, however that information is contextualized between the empirical or the aesthetic, where we have like this language system, these symbols, like my father with the math,
right? Completely.
With
Greek letters,
which is so abstract and esoteric to so many. But then I grew up, going to school in Santa Barbara, where I spent most of my days skipping class and heading into the Santa Ynez Mountains, where the Chumash art sites are everywhere.
Yeah.
These paintings that are so beautiful and so abstract, and a lot of that the specific narrative has been lost, only now to be somewhat vaguely resurgent in tribal narratives, but I wonder if I were to take there's 2 points I want to make. If I were to take like this purple owl here on the cover of the Forest of California, and show that owl to that Chumash artist who made one of those paintings, would they not be as baffled by this like smear of paint on paper as representing an owl as I am mystified by their paintings? Right. And you translate that to now, where you have the next generation of kids. I don't really see any of them in here tonight. But where they have like, where scrolling is now replacing reading as the activity that is the thing done, and we're all sort of guilty of that. But then you have like this new hieroglyphic alphabet, this emoji thing emerging, where things don't mean other things. Like it's a very complex language of juxtaposition
of cartoons.
And if you get that wrong, man, Gen Z,
well, that's why I'm just like I'm staying away from those like eggplants and stuff. I just don't know what it's not for me.
It's amazing, like the evolution of these semiotics, And yet, here I am with a painting on every page, sort of exploring that space. Like, what is the emoji? What are these, like, this creative mythopoetics, this engagement with describing the ecological reality of my world, my California, in terms of that metaphor, in terms of that meaningful context.
Yeah, it's so interesting. When our children were born, they were 6 months old, and we were literally reading to them every single night. So, from 6 months old, 3 months old, all the way to their 10, we read, and so we were reading. We'd have 82 materials checked out of the local public library. We'd read 9 picture books every night. But when you read 9 picture books every single day for a year on and year out, you begin to have a visual literacy that I just didn't have before that.
Oh, wow.
And maybe that's part of the reason why I love these books so much too, is that they engage that part of me too.
Yeah.
Talk about what you were like as a kid. Like how did you get from going to look at the cave paintings in the mountains of Santa Ynez? What were you like as a child? Like what did you read? What did you do? What was what led to this?
Right. Well, I alluded to a little bit the playing with the tarantulas on Mount Diablo.
Yeah, we had great tarantulas.
My father had
down
me throughout high school. It was 3 hours of calculus homework every day. With this, you got the stack of 20 bond paper, and then you had the big can of number 2s, sharp number 2s.
I totally
do. They still kind of work that way. But that's, and then you go and you write you make the. I really got into the composition of my calculus problems.
Right. It's a beautiful. I sometimes remember writing those the integration symbol
and so that led into my love of calligraphy. Right. And my father, as the mathematician, was always lamented how you often see in math classes, they don't really teach you how to write the problems. It's you show your work. It's kids are doing it in the margins and that kind of thing. It's spread out the letters, make them all very legible. You know, legibility is so important, right?
Yeah.
And so that led into like the wildlife rendering and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So
When
it was a lot of
when you
math,
first
a lot
started
of nature.
drawing, like who taught you how to draw?
That was me.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, that was me.
Wow.
And you know, I got into UCSB as a biology major and left with an art degree.
Yeah.
You know, God bless the University of
You
California.
did both. God, I love that place. Did you
Yeah.
see Jack Johnson when you were hanging out around there?
I didn't actually. He and I think we just missed each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and
But
then
I can still name like a dozen professors.
oh yeah, I can imagine. They've had such an impact on me. Your teachers, or I live by what they taught me every single day of the week.
That's right. And I remember, you know, like, there's so much philosophy in there too. And one of the core philosophies, one of my teachers, C.L. Bergman, who herself was a student of George O'Keeffe, and she was like, she was on this crusade against sarcasm.
Yeah.
Especially in artwork.
Yeah.
Let us take this seriously.
Yeah.
This technology of the beautiful transmission. You know, and there's no room for that bullshit. You know, excuse my French. But like, you know, that and that really, you know, that really launched me into this trajectory of that ultimately I believe leads me to this ethical place now where I am not, say, like an environmental alarmist.
Right.
I wouldn't even call myself an environmentalist.
Yeah, interesting.
Because I believe that the history of environmentalism over the latter half of the 20th century, and I'm not necessarily talking about the 60s and 70s, given that we have such examples of like Rachel Carson and the Silent Spring spawning things like the golden age of environmental legislation, where we have the invention of the Environmental Protection Agency, the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Wilderness Act, all of these really fascinating
and
laws.
Important laws, yeah.
But since then, there is an inexorable cynicism about the environmental movement that strikes me as being rather anti-human.
Yeah.
Like this idea, like if only the humans
weren't here.
Yeah.
Then
we're like a cancer on the planet, right?
Yeah.
That you hear that refrain a lot. That sort of like false analogy in my estimation, because you are a part of this world.
Yeah.
And to deny that, to deny your own like involvement with ecology, to deny your own evolution as part of this, you know, beautiful unfolding thing, is sort of wrong at best and a perpetuation of a kind of injustice at worst.
Yeah.
Because of the indigenous story.
Yeah.
California exists in its current configuration because of decisions that people have made and people are making today.
Right.
I mean, the whole configuration of the landscape is only about 6,000 years old.
Yeah, and honestly, when you talk about like fire regimes, I just think of water regimes. I didn't read your water book, but I got to get to that. But like the peripheral canal, and I mean, just in the same way that, I mean, honestly too, I mean, growing up in the Central Valley, I mean, we're burning rice stubble like every August. I mean, there was so much smoke in the air. So it was even like industrial agriculture was burning everything too.
Oh yeah.
But it's but it's something. In Hawaii too. I mean, the sugar cane. I mean, those sugar cane fields. That's what they did. They burned all of it.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a couple of points there. The State of Water book is really the sister book to the State of Fire. It came out in 2019, and that book is thin too, for a very specific reason why this book is thin. You'll notice that the rest of my books are awfully thick, about 600, 700 pages, because I really want to be as comprehensive as I possibly can, and I always fail miserably, but it's okay. This State of Fire is a very thin book, because I just want to answer the one question, why California burns in terms of its ecological contextualization. The State of Fire, State of Water, understanding California's most precious resource, is really a quick study of storage, usage, and conveyance.
Yeah.
I don't get into money. I don't get into rights legislation and that kind of like
water
that
law,
quagmire.
that kind of stuff.
I don't get into water law too much at all, right? I just like how much do we have? How much do we need? Just almost in reaction to all those billboards you see flying down I-5,
yeah, my gosh,
you know,
yeah, totally.
that kind of thing. And what I realize, and I think you might appreciate this, Malcolm, it's like the subtitle of the book, Understanding California's Most Precious Resource, implies that it's the liquid stuff itself, you know. The most precious resource, I realize, as I'm presenting my work to the Farmers Association in Fresno or the ranchers of Lassen County or whatever, is that the most precious resource is our ability to trust each other with the story at all.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
Like,
and that's exactly what you said about fire too.
Yeah.
It's like about societal relations.
Yeah.
And that's in a way what I guess what's doing. It's like raising our consciousness so that we might be able to make better decisions. So so you graduate from UC Santa Barbara, and like I would describe you as an artist. I mean, what advice do you have for other artists who are getting started? I mean, your path is so idiosyncratic, but there must be things that you would share with other people who might be just graduating with an art degree from Santa Barbara.
Right. Well, from my own experience, I spent decades trying to figure out how to be a gallery artist.
Yeah.
You know, and I had shows in San Francisco and Los Angeles and New York, and my work was much different back then. Oil paintings on canvas, very moody, figurative stuff, and I could never figure out how to leave my day job.
Yeah.
You know, the business plan wasn't there.
Right.
It wasn't until like 2010s, 2015 when I'm really like watching and feeling this existential schism from the real world and the virtual world somehow.
Yeah.
When I sort of lock my own private talons into the land that is my home, and I give it then all away to this thing that I love most in the universe, which is the more than human world of California, right?
Yeah.
And I give it all to that, and that's when the doors began to open. When I got the book deal for my first book, The California Field Atlas, and I just went all in, and this came out. And I was writing this in 2016, thinking we were about to have we're going to have our first female president with a modicum of environmental policy, that extension of the Obama years, and then 45, President number 45 happened, and or I should call him 45, 47, and there was this like countervailing force, like I sensed and I heard this explicitly from a lot of people, this Trump effect that's like, wait, how do I live here?
Yeah.
What's going on in this place? I need to know something that's true about this place, because I'm fed, I am just sold disinformation, misinformation at such an alarming rate that hopefully there's a bit of resonance in deeper truths and axioms that as I say are embedded in this core ethology, that it is not a better argument that changes minds, it is a better story. Yeah. And so I say things like, given all of the injuries of climate breakdown by way of anthropogenic global warming, giving all the injuries of invasive regimes, deformed regimes for earth, air, fire, and water, of development patterns, however ill-conceived, despite all of that, we have this miracle to steward. And that miracle is that although every single one of our landscape types is either endangered or threatened or critically endangered, we have a very low extinction rate in the state. It's less than 1%. We've lost some of our most beautiful creatures, including that gorgeous piece of megafauna that we put on our state flag.
Right,
last year was the 100th commemoration of the death of the last California grizzly bear. But we have less than 1% extinction rate in California right now. That means all the pieces are still on the board.
Yeah.
And biodiversity always necessarily means healthy ecosystems, or endemic biodiversity, I should say. Healthy ecosystems mean reliable ecological services, and ecological services are what every human community has always depended on since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
Protect the biodiversity, protect the humans.
Yeah.
It's those systems of redundancy inside of the ecological space that make this land abundant, fertile, and ultimately safe.
Yeah.
And so that threshold, that bottleneck that we're in right now is this miracle. There's not a lot of laurels to like stand on. Is that what you do with laurels?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But there is a navigable heading towards leaving California's more than
There's not a lot
world.
of laurels to rest in.
That's what it is. Rest on. Yeah, you rest on. I think you're.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know.
Bay laurel.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when you said it.
But there's a possibility. There's a navigable heading. And more than a possibility. Don't bet against us humans. Don't bet against our ingenuity. Don't bet against, because there's a possibility, there's a navigable heading towards leaving the more than human world at the end of the 21st century in better shape than we left it at the end of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And I think the sword from the stone being pulled, if you will, is that combination of scientific innovation, traditional ecological knowledge, that interface, that consilience of the two that is now becoming rapidly apparent. You know? And it's apparent at the top of our government, at least statewide.
And Scott Sampson was one of our foreign guests from California Academy.
Oh, yeah.
And he was great. I mean, basically, they're redirecting the entire institution to do exactly what you just described. Yeah. And by the way, Rebecca just gave me the signal. So if you have questions, please write them down, and Rebecca will collect them. But yeah, so I want to talk to you. One of the things you say in your book is you just kind of in passing, you say how much you appreciate redwood trees. Tell us about why redwood trees are so great.
Who doesn't love redwood trees?
I know. One of the most amazing things.
Well, a redwood tree is just fascinating, and I'm talking specifically about coastal redwood trees, Sequoia sempervirens, which is the tallest tree in the world. Right now we've just reintroduced condor back to the largest terrestrial bird in North America. We've reintroduced to the tallest forests of the world. If that's not like a sign of hope.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember backpacking in my 80s, in Big Sur, and just feeling like nature was something that I missed. It's just like, there were no tule elk, there were no peregrine falcons, there were no beaver, there were, the list goes on. There's no white-tailed American kites. It just goes on and on. There are no whales. There are no otters. All of that.
Yeah, well, pelicans
were condors.
It seemed like pelicans were going to die out in the 70s.
Absolutely, and they would have if it wasn't for
changes in the legislation then to
Rachel
DDT.
Carson. Absolutely. And now there are no bald eagles. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Now we're talking about population resurgence across the board.
I've never been to Pinnacles. I want to go to Pinnacles and see those.
I love how hope is always corresponds with precedent. Like, that's the best kind of hope.
Yeah.
It's like, well, where does hope come from? Well, look at all this. Look at all of this.
Yeah.
It's still here.
Yeah.
You've got to go to Pinnacles. You haven't been to Pinnacles?
I haven't. Well, I mean, I've been down 101 and looked up in the mountains, but...
Oh, yeah. No.
That doesn't count.
Well, you got to go around the back if you want to camp.
Yeah.
Right? You got to come in from the west entrance, or it's the east entrance, I should say. And that's where the campground is. And then you do the High Peaks Trail, and you do it either in the morning or the evening. Yeah. And it's weird when you don't see a condor at this point.
So that's what I've got to see. I've got to get that on my list. I just can never...
Y'all seen condors? Yeah. When you're out and you see a condor, first thought is, whoa, that is not a turkey vulture.
Yeah, right? Well, that's what I always thought.
They're about twice the size of the biggest turkey vulture you ever saw.
Yeah.
But they got this shock of white underneath their armpits there. So that's where you can really tell that's not. But they also have like this languid, like really rarely flapping their wings.
Yeah.
But they're the size of a big car.
Yeah.
And then they fly over your head, and you sort of get a chill forms, if you will. Like, you're being sized up by this Pleistocene anachronistic organism, that's like, you're out of time, and yet this place is yours, And it's,
so here's a few questions.
I totally didn't even answer your question. I was supposed to talk about redwoods.
No, but you did. You told me what you told me about one thing that I said, what do you love about redwoods? And the idea of introducing that largest bird in the largest tree. Mm-hmm. That was the best gift.
Okay, wonderful.
Because everybody here, you're right. We all love redwood trees. Okay. Quote, our young dumb forests, end quote, seem to be reflecting growing our young, dumb country, is there a forest in this country that serves as a model for good management? Well, that's a great question.
Yeah, it depends on your definition of what forest is.
And great management, probably.
Right. Yeah, forest is one of those words that doesn't really work as in a singular tense. Like, it doesn't work as a forest is not a private entity.
Yeah.
Probably like you and I are not private entities. You know,
Yeah.
we belong in a community.
Yeah,
a forest
exactly.
is an ever change. A forest is not an object. A forest is the dynamic system of intelligence.
Yeah.
And dynamic system of changing parameters of these different, stress and nutritive vectors that inform the plant bionts and the fungal bionts, the mycelial bionts of this ancient confederacy of genetic contracts.
Yeah,
space,
I love
right?
that.
Yeah.
So what's a forest that you think is well managed?
Well, there's pieces. Pieces and parts. Pieces is tough. It's like E.O. Wilson described, like the Amazon rainforest is like a rug. You can't like take that rug and divide it into, take some scissors and make
squares.
200 smaller rugs, and each one of those is like equivalent to the larger rug.
Yeah.
That's not how. I really like that analogy.
He was a great guy. I knew him when I was a doctoral student.
Oh yeah, is that right?
He was wonderful.
Huge influence on
Yeah,
me.
when you said consilience, I was like, yeah, that's it.
Oh,
E.O.
yeah. So E.O. Wilson, if you don't know, is probably the 20th century, the greatest American naturalist of the 20th century, I'd probably say.
Wow,
I mean, he was the guy who really invented and coined the word biodiversity. He was the guy who really, or sociobiology was another one. And with Robert MacArthur in 1968, he wrote the evolutionary theory of island biogeography, which was really the first time that Darwinian thought was applied to the landscape.
Yeah.
Like Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, doesn't really describe the origin of species.
Yeah, it doesn't at
it
all.
just describes the method of evolution by natural selection, but doesn't really get into why new species happen.
Yeah.
And that's the first book that really did, and that was like within our lifetime. So when we're talking about the new story, this is like.
And you're so right. I mean, in terms of like, it's 2025. There's 75 years between now and the end of the next century, and we're going to have a totally altered understanding of ourselves if the last 50 years is any indication.
I think it's changing rapidly.
Yeah,
I
it
do.
really is.
Yeah.
I even was practicing yoga. We have yoga on Tuesday and Saturday, and yesterday I was doing the yoga practice.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
I love yoga.
It's so great.
Yeah.
Call me and we'll.
Okay, thank you.
But so we have a window with Einstein in it, and E equals MC squared from the 60s, and we have an image of like the Milky Way galaxy. Yeah. But I mean, I just like, you don't see images like that in cathedrals in North Europe, because our picture of who we are and what we are is changing.
Who we are and what we are is changing. That's right. And if only ecology was the math has yet to be invented to adequately describe it.
Yeah.
I almost feel like we're waiting for the next Darwin, if you will, and she's probably 5 years old now.
That's
and
right.
Exactly.
She's on her way. Okay, so here's another question. I have a large and unkempt native plant garden in the Oakland Hills. What advice would you give to gardeners in California? That's the first question. And second, if you were asked to create a curriculum on California's natural environment for high school students, what would you say? So the first question is, what do you do about the unkempt native plant garden in the Oakland Hills?
Unkept native plant garden in the Oakland Hills. It's funny, I'm sort of going through this with my wife right now. What are we going to plant?
Sounds kind of close to home.
Yeah, exactly. But we're not in the Oakland Hills.
Yeah,
Oakland Hills are a different thing. Oakland Hills.
Yeah, I just think of Montclair and those cypress trees.
If you live here in Northern California and you just watched what happened in Los Angeles, you walk outside and take a deep breath and get real quiet, and you can hear the clock ticking. Mm. Fire in California is always on the way, and it will not be denied. The Oakland firestorm was October 1991.
Yeah.
And that happened in 12 hours.
Yeah, a quarter of the houses in my congregation were gone. Well, households lost their houses. A quarter, 25%.
So it's really no joke. Fire-hardened architecture and landscape design is really no
I
joke.
really wanted to ask you about
Get
that,
your
too.
plants away from your house.
Yeah.
Clear out your space. Go zone 1, 2, 3. If you don't know what I mean by zone 1, 2, 3, go look it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and get some defensible space going on around your property.
Yeah.
That is, and then harden, and then check out what's going on under your deck. Check out your vents. Check out your roof materials. Check out all the hardscaping. There's a lot of work to do, and do it today.
Yeah.
Like, it's a good day to do it. It's raining, but it's fine.
Yeah, that was one of my questions about architectural design and fire. Okay, so, and then the curriculum for natural environment for high school students.
Oh, yeah. I love talking to high school students. You know, I spoke to some high school students about 4 months ago in Malibu. It wasn't Malibu, no, it was Laguna Beach, and Orange County. And I said, what?
That's where I fell in love with my wife.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, walking along the beach there. Oh, it's so beautiful.
Shout out to Heidi.
And you know what, their mascot was the artists.
What?
Their high school mascot was where the artists.
Bunch of bohemians.
Well, and I said I had a cheer for them, like a cheer at the football games, like "Go Van Go." But I think they changed their mascot. But anyway, back to the high school students. What did you say to the high school students, and what did they say to you?
I'm talking in front of the high school students, and you know, I'm like, so how many of you here have been affected by wildfire?
Yeah.
Everybody raised their hand.
Yeah.
You know, everybody feels it in their bones. I mean, quite literally in their lungs.
Yeah.
But in their bones, you have a sense that fire is not a bug in the system. Fire is not the remainder of some equation that has to be balanced. Fire is the system.
Yeah.
Fire is how California ecology progresses, succeeds in its own adaptive cycle again and again, frees up those nutritive vectors, those niche resources, such that it can proceed as a living system. Okay, so when I was talking to these kids, I'm like, what if I were to tell you that fire represents the greatest economic opportunity in the 21st century? Because getting right with fire, which is mandatory for this prescription that I have to like leave 21st century in better shape than the 20th century,
right.
Getting right with fire, whatever that means, it's going to change everything in terms of software design, artificial intelligence, real estate, $600 billion in the $4 trillion nominal GDP that California is, insurance, another $600 billion, right? We're talking about landscape design, infrastructure design, policy, healthcare. We're talking about a massive transformation of California industry that will shore up California's resiliency and adaptivity.
Yeah.
Should you know, the gauntlet be seized?
Right.
I don't know if you do that with gauntlets.
Yeah, you do.
Do you seize gauntlets?
Oh, right. Good point. You cast the gauntlet down.
Cast the gauntlet. Yeah, the gauntlet has been cast. You pick up the gauntlet?
Yeah, you do. Okay. Now we're going to joust.
Whatever you do with the gauntlet, let's pick up the gauntlet. Let's because that's the part of that, like, attending to the responsibilities that come
and you're
with
right.
all
I mean,
of the
basically,
rights.
we've lived in according to a myth that we could just live without fire, and now we're coming to realize that that's false. And so, how are we going to adjust as a society?
And that myth was instantiated in government policy for 100 years.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, Gifford Pinchot, was the fourth director of the United States Forest Service, said that explicitly in 1913.
He has a redwood tree named after him in Mill Valley.
Oh, yeah, he's got a bunch of things. He's got a mountain. He's got all kinds of stuff. But, you know, he was operating under the science of the time, which said, suppress fire enough and fire will go away.
Yeah.
That was the policy. That was the science. That was what the data showed.
Yeah.
We can master the environment in that way. Wrong.
Yeah. And those forests that they planted and they tended are dying now. You know, we're on to a new day. Okay, we have one more question. You mentioned your father wrote textbooks. Are you familiar with John Muir Laws, son of federal judge Bob Laws, John who lived in the Sierras for 6 years, creating field guides? If so, please share your view.
Oh, yeah. Everybody calls him Jack.
Yeah.
He goes by Jack.
Okay, great.
And Jack is, he's also a heyday artist. So great. He's published by the same author I am. Yeah. Jack's a good friend of mine. He wrote the Laws Guide to Sierra Nevada, which was like, it's just the best. just the best. And in fact, he wrote that about 8 years before I wrote my first book. So when I went to Heyday, I knew that I had to offer some, what do you call it, shelf-side differentiation with Jack's
some
books.
Balance,
so that's why I came up with, like, I invented this, in Latin it's called sui generis.
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
a genre of one.
Yeah, exactly.
Genre of one, right?
Yeah.
So that's like, I invented this thing called the field atlas to describe the how of things, not the what of things. I'll leave Jack to describe the what is this plant, what is this bird.
Yeah.
Like my books don't really do that at all.
Yeah.
In fact, they don't. You know, I'm more about the how of the earth, air, fire, and water, informing, making the case for, and the continued celebration of California's biodiversity.
Yeah, exactly. What kind of leadership? Oh, man, I've got to go preach a sermon. I cannot do this. I can't do this.
Well, as usual, we're only getting started.
Exactly. That's exactly right. In a way, that's what each one of these books is like an
true.
encouragement to continue the conversation.
Thank you.
We have, I have all these business guys who are like, I have a hard stop at 10:30, and
I so
for
appreciate
me, like,
y'all coming out.
Everybody's waiting for
so
me
much.
up there to preach a sermon.
Yeah, man.
All right, please join us next Sunday when our guest will be renowned nutritionist Marion Nessel. She's like the most frequently quoted person in the New York Times that I've ever run across. We'll be talking about the politics of what we eat. I encourage you to buy a copy of the State of Fire, available in the back. You're always welcome to join us upstairs for the Choral Eucharist at 11 o'clock. My sermon title this week is Preaching Against Hitler. God, man, that's a tough one. But maybe you're going to make it.
Is that hard?
We'll see. So we rely on your support for the forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. There are many ways to give, including texting the word THINK, T-H-I-N-K, to 76278. And thank you so much, Obi Kaufmann, for being here. What a blessing to have you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. You'll help us walk through the land in a new way.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you so much. What a pleasure to be here.